Where do the Miami Heat and Philadelphia 76ers go from here? Their Eastern Conference rivals, the Milwaukee Bucks and Boston Celtics, both upgraded in major ways this summer, and the Heat and Sixers are left dealing with the aftermath. In the case of Miami, can this team who shocked the world on their way to the NBA Finals as an 8th seed last season get back to that point despite losing some depth and missing out on Damian Lillard? And in the case of Philadelphia, can this team do enough to keep their big man Joel Embiid happy despite the ongoing drama with James Harden in the front office? It only makes sense to somehow preview these two teams together because they are both in somewhat similar situations, peering through a closing window on their championship aspirations. Can they somehow still get over the hump? Let's dissect it. But first, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more NBA content. The season is almost here, and we have tons of great NBA videos coming your way to get you prepped for an awesome season. Also, this is the final season preview, so go back and watch the other ones if you want to get ready for what should be, again, an amazing season of NBA basketball. Let's get started. Off to Miami first. After a months-long battle for the rights to trade for Damian Lillard, the Heat fell short, with Portland instead opting to trade Lillard to the Milwaukee Bucks over his preferred destination. Now, for any Heat fans watching this, I am not here to relitigate how that happened. The deals, the offers on the table, the deplorable behavior, etc., etc. In the end, being all in on the Lillard sweepstakes forced Miami to miss out on some of these key free agents that could have helped round out their rotation. Most notably, they let Max Strus and Gabe Vincent walk, two guys who played pivotal roles for Miami through the last few seasons, especially last postseason, where Vincent was a key cog for this team's final run. Those are two guys who consistently spaced the floor for their intrepid star duo of Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo, and ultimately, I think some of that floor spacing will be missed. Vincent's ability to defend at the point of attack will also be missed, and I think ultimately one of the main areas of concern I have for this Heat team is their lack of depth at the point guard spot behind Kyle Lowry. Who knows if Lowry is going to start at point guard or if it'll be Tyler Hero, who missed the majority of their 2023 finals run with a hand injury, but either way, relying on a 37-year-old Lowry is going to be tough. You won't find a bigger Lowry fan than me, obviously, and I think for the most part, he's got a lot of unnecessary hate while in Miami. He was really good for them in the 2021-2022 season where the Heat were dealing with injuries and was a huge part of Miami securing the 1 seed that season. He's even had moments in the playoffs through the last 2 seasons for Miami, being the Heat's steady hand in certain moments. But ultimately, he's still 37, and he's at the tail end of what has been an awesome career. It's just that relying on him to be PG number 1 is going to be tough, which is why Hero comes into play this season and is probably the biggest X factor for Miami this year. As his career has progressed, Tyler has been tasked with being the primary ball handler more and more often, especially last season where he was a pseudo point guard for this team with Lowry battling through personal issues and injuries. He is a consistent scorer, a great shooter, both off the catch and off of the bounce, and has consistently improved his ability to make plays for others, given more responsibility. With Vincent gone and Lowry a year older, the onus will be on Hero to steer the ship on offense for this Miami team. And how well he handles that in the midst of all this trade hoopla that went down this summer is going to be huge. Despite making it to the finals this year, Miami's offense desperately missed Hero's ability to create for himself and shoot the ball more consistently. And I think given what he brings to this team, he should be due for a big season. The defensive side of the ball is the main question with Hero, and how Eric Spoelstra is able to game plan for that will be interesting. Especially because if you want to have another long playoff run, Hero will be tasked with guarding guys like Damian Lillard and Jrue Holiday, and while there are ways to counteract that through switching actions that involve Hero or running the patent Miami zone defense, it's still a question and a hurdle that they have to get over this season. Speaking of point of attack defense, the Heat added, or I should say re-added, Josh Richardson, who is a sound point of attack defender with long arms that can be a menace defensively. Josh is a pretty limited offensive player despite expanding his game over the years, and he's been a pretty inconsistent shooter for the most part, but you know what he brings every night as a defender, a cutter, and connector. He obviously is already familiar with playing guys like Jimmy and Bam, so it should be a seamless fit, and he at least gives them an extra body on defense come playoff time. They also added Thomas Bryant to replace Cody Cody Zeller as the big man off of the bench. And while Bryant is a better offensive player, especially one who can stretch the floor, he is not a good defender, and I think that's something that is an area of concern. That being said, between Bam, re-signing Kevin Love, and prospects like Orlando Robinson and Nikola Jovic, there's a route for Miami to be fine as a front court team without leaning on Bryant too much. Still, for example, teams like the Denver Nuggets with Nikola Jokic would pose a massive matchup problem for them and seemingly would be a major hurdle for them to eventually get over the hump. But ultimately, some of these fringe guys is what makes Miami so damn intriguing, because you never know what they're able to make out of some of their prospects. We can make fun of Heat culture all we want, but ultimately, the most Heat culture thing is being able to consistently find these diamonds in the rough and turning them into rotation players. That's what happened with Strus and Vincent, and they're off on different teams making big time money. There's hope that Miami can do much of the same this season with an intriguing crop of prospects. They drafted Jaime Jaquez this year in the 2023 draft, a big body wing that they can throw out into lineups. Jaquez can ideally create a little bit for them, space the floor as a shooter, and he's a great rebounder and playmaker for his position. Ultimately, he's still a rookie, and he still needs to come along both physically and defensively, but he's intriguing, to say the least. They also have Jovic, the Serbian who turned heads at the 2023 FIBA World Cup with his impressive play. If Jovic can space the floor for them at the center spot, be another big body, and be this sort of versatile utility knife on that end, it'll be a huge win for Miami. Ultimately, it's just about how much that translates into the NBA game, but I know Heat fans are high on him, and so am I. And I'd be remiss without mentioning Haywood Highsmith, who played some really good minutes for them in the 2023 NBA playoffs. He was this long, versatile defender who was able to play at the point of attack, and if he can do anything offensively for them this season, he's going to be a consistent part of their rotation. But I think the biggest X factor for this Heat team outside of Hero is Caleb Martin. He sort of broke out in the 2023 playoffs. He was Miami's third fiddle with Hero out and was one of the main reasons they were able to upset the Boston Celtics in the conference finals. Martin showed off an ability to create for himself, played solid defense on the wings, and he was able to shoot the ball at a high clip. If all of that stays, then we're looking at a potential most improved candidate, and he seemingly changes Miami's ceiling as a roster. Maybe what we saw in the playoffs was his way of figuring out how his career looks. We saw it a few years ago with Duncan Robinson, we saw it with Strus and Vincent, and maybe now we see it with Martin. But regardless, it seems like Martin is going to be a huge part of the future of this team with Jimmy and Bam, and he complements them well, especially when he's shooting the ball as well as he did in those playoffs. And the reason you're so confident these guys can just figure it out is because Miami has a history of this. There is a proven track record of finding rotational players and making the most out of them. Now, who knows? Maybe there's a trade on the horizon, something Pat Riley and company are cooking up in response to the Bucks and Celtics upgrading, but as it stands, can the Heat compete with these two teams? My answer has to be yes. A resounding yes. I think every year this Miami team is somehow underrated. They sort of sleepwalk their way through the regular season, and Spo and Miami's coaching staff use the year as a sort of testing ground to see which young players they can try and develop. It's what happens every season, and there's a good chance that it happens again this year. Throw Jimmy Butler, throw Bam Adebayo, and throw Eric Spoelstra in a playoff series against the Bucks and Celtics, and you know, just some way, they're going to make it extremely difficult for those two teams to win. It's just how it goes, and until they prove otherwise, I don't see a reason to doubt that it'll happen again. The Heat have the top-end talent to compete, they have the coaching to make things interesting against any team in the East, and it'll just depend on Hero, Martin, and these other guys to see if they can really take them to the next level. There's no question that there's a level of pressure for Miami. Jimmy is 34, Kyle is 37. The window for them to actually contend around Butler and crew is dwindling, but I don't think this is the season where we see that window completely shut just yet. And speaking of pressure, the Philadelphia 76ers are dealing with their fair share this season too. After being a quarter away from their first conference finals berth in 20 plus years, the Sixers failed to get over the hump last season, losing to the Celtics in round 2. Joel Embiid battled through injuries to play in that series, and James Harden had some heroic performances, but it ultimately wasn't enough for them to get the job done. Now Harden wants out, and as an expiring contract, it makes it all that more difficult for the Sixers to trade him for good value. Harden called Daryl Morey a liar. He didn't show up on media day, although he's expected to take part in training camp. And ultimately, it doesn't seem like this mess is going to be getting resolved anytime soon. Where Harden ends up, whether he stays with the Sixers this season or is traded at the deadline, all of these things are still unanswered. And while we might get some answers in the coming weeks leading up to opening night, it's hard to get a read on the situation. There's not that much of a market or desire to trade for Harden unless you're a competing team, and if you are, most of those teams either don't have the assets the Sixers are interested in or the money possible to make the trade and then pay him max money this summer as well, which makes it a tricky situation for the Sixers to get back proper value for the beard. And it makes it tricky for us to really assess how this Sixers team might look come playoff time. But with that being said, it's mostly the same team, save for one half of the best pick and roll partnership in the league. And while they did lose some rotation players in George Niang, Shake Milton, and Jalen McDaniels, they also added Patrick Beverley, Danny Green, Kelly Oubre, and Mo Bamba to fill out those roles. They also re-signed Montrezl Harrell and Paul Reed, although I'm not sure if Harrell is actually going to be playing legitimate minutes for them this season. But probably the most important change for the Sixers this season, outside of the impending Harden deal, is their change from Doc Rivers to Nick Nurse as head coach. Nurse is obviously an NBA champion. He's known for his ability to make adjustments live in game, something that was a flaw of Doc Rivers' to some, and is known for his creativity, especially on defense. Now, having watched Nick Nurse coach for the past 5 years, there are some common misconceptions. First, he is great at making adjustments, especially in playoff scenarios, but he's also less malleable and doesn't really go deep in his bench to use his depth, oftentimes relying on stars to carry heavy minute loads. Maybe that was just an issue with the Raptors, but it's at least something to watch for as it relates to the Sixers, and especially with Embiid's injury history. Second, while Nurse is a really creative defensive coach, his offensive structure leaves a lot to be desired. He oftentimes just wants his stars to sort of dictate and freestyle out there, and while that can work for some teams that don't need the structure, it definitely didn't work for the Raptors, who were begging for it. That being said, I think Nurse should fit well with the Sixers style. They have the top end talent to alleviate some of the offensive concerns with his coaching, and he can bring out the best on defense for Embiid as well. Without Harden, guys like Pat Bev might slot in next to Tyrese Maxey this year in the backcourt, and maybe a guy like Oubre will be looked at to do a little bit more offensively. That being said, the biggest domino and their biggest X factor without Harden has to be Maxey. Through his first 3 seasons in the league, Maxey has toyed with star status. He showed flashes and glimpses of sheer brilliance and dynamism offensively. He's explosive, he can beat virtually anyone off the dribble, he's become an excellent shooter in the NBA, both off the catch and off the dribble, and paired with Embiid, he'd be a lot of fun to watch. The next step for Maxey is to become an all-star in this league, and that's more of a when, not an if. He might go through some growing pains this season as he gets thrust into a role as the second option and lead playmaker. How comfortable he is making reads out of the pick and roll and being this primary initiator is going to be a big question, and ultimately, he's going to take some bumps just getting adjusted to defenses being more honed in on him. You already sort of know what you're getting from the Sixers. Embiid is going to dominate in MVP-like fashion as long as he's healthy. Maxey is going to toy with all-star status. Guys like DeAnthony Melton, PJ Tucker, Tobias Harris, and Beverly will play their respective roles in pretty steady fashion. And maybe guys like Oubre, Bamba, and Reed come into their own a little bit more this season. But the domino to watch is Harden, the fallout, and the eventual return package that precedes it, because that will ultimately make or break Philly's chances this season. And that's why there's so much pressure, because on paper, especially with Harden, I would say the Sixers team has a chance, much like Miami, to make some noise and even potentially beat one of Boston or Milwaukee in the playoffs. But without Harden, that's just not true. And unless they get an immediate contributor in return, or stuff that can be exchanged for an immediate contributor, Philly's future sort of looks bleak. Look, the Sixers are prepping for tons of cap space this summer. They only have 4 players signed on for next season, and assuming Maxey eventually gets his max extension, that makes it 5. They will have room this summer to go out and try to find another star to pair with Embiid. But what if they don't? If they fumble the Harden situation and then fall flat on their faces in free agency, then I can see the next step being a Joel Embiid trade request. Now, Embiid was in good spirits all of media day this week. He stated multiple times that he wants to stay in Philadelphia and win in Philadelphia. But at some point, he'll start looking elsewhere, especially with everything that's gone down with the Sixers during his tenure. That's how much pressure there is on Philly over the course of these next 10 months. The window for both Miami and Philadelphia is slowly but surely closing. And with Boston and Miami now the alphas in the East, can they find a way to keep themselves in the conversation? I guess we'll have to wait and see. Let us know in the comments. And as always, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel. See you guys later.